Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, Zoe Routh here, your friendly neighborhood team navigator. I love to work with leaders and their teams on the tough stuff in leadership, namely the people stuff. Together, we tackle really interesting issues like climbing mountains, running rapids, and wrestling bears. No, not really. We talk about how we can work better together, and sometimes that can feel like wrestling bears, but we don't actually wrestle any bears. My guest today, though, has done some pretty incredible stuff close to wrestling bears, if not even better. His name is Manley Hopkinson. He is all about compassionate leadership. How he got to that point is through grand adventures and a lot of self-reflection. He's the founder of Manley Talks Limited. He's a successful author of Compassionate Leadership, How to Create and Maintain Engaged, Committed, High-Performing Teams. He's served twice as an officer in the Royal UK Navy. He is the winner of the first ever polar race, skiing to the magnetic North Pole in record time. And he has been the skipper in the world's toughest yacht race, the BT Global Challenge. That's 9 months, 32,000 miles around the world. And we spend quite a bit of time talking about that in this marvelous interview. And the thread through all of that is how people can choose how they experience their journey and how each of their goals is one step along the journey, not an end in itself. And the flavor of compassion oozes through it all. I loved it. I hope you do too. Let's get on with it. Well, all the way from fabulous London, we have an extraordinary guest. Welcome to the show, Manley Hopkinson.
Hi, Zoe. How are you? You well?
I am well. You are all fired up because it's the beginning of the day over there and it's the tail end of the day here. And we have so much to talk about. I'm really excited about your background, your book, and what you're doing out there. So where to even start? I think we'll start with the Royal Navy and the Royal Hong Kong Police as one of your first forays into leadership, I guess. So tell us, how did you get into why did you choose to go into Navy and where has that led you since then?
Yeah, and actually the Navy and the Hong Kong Police were two very separate chapters as well. My father was Navy, so I was brought up in a Navy family, but actually I went off to university to do architecture first. But it didn't take me long to recognise that I wasn't an architect. 7 years at university,
No.
I survived just over a year before I left, just before they threw me out. It's all about timing in life as well. And then I thought, no, come on, do something you know you're good at. And so I joined the Navy. One of the things with the Navy is interesting, Zoe, is that at the time you don't realise what a luxury it is and what a privilege too, but leadership is on the agenda from the very first day, every single day of your career, from the age of 18 or 19 onwards. You're selected for your potential to be a leader. Potential is a really important word. It's not the fact you are one, because you've got to grow into the position in so many ways. But it's just your potential. And then literally every single day, you're tested, you're examined, you're trained, you're exposed, you're given feedback on your ability to be a leader. And sometimes the feedback is brutal too. And it's only later in life you realize actually what a luxury that is, because in Civvy Street, in normal industry, that just does not happen. We don't give leadership training to 18-year-olds for some crazy reason. But it was a lot of fun. And I really, really enjoyed my time in the Navy. What you may have worked out from my bio is that if I gave a chronology of jobs, clearly I can't keep a job for very long. I've got a very low boredom threshold. And so I was going to join it and transfer to the Royal Marines, and I did my time in the Navy. And then I just saw an advert in the Sunday papers saying Royal Hong Kong Marine Police, come out of Hong Kong. This is back in the mid-'80s. And Hong Kong was still the sort of dying embers of the British Empire at the time. And you go straight in as an inspector. I thought, wow, that just sounds so exciting. So I left the Navy and jumped ship, as they say, and disappeared off to Hong Kong.
Why did it sound exciting to be an inspector? Was it just that it was going to be in Hong Kong, or was it the fact of being an inspector?
It was the Far East. I had a very romantic image of the Far East. There's a lovely old classic 1960s film with Cary Grant, I think, called The Life and Times of Susie Wong. And I remember watching it and the Star ferries going across Hong Kong harbour. And I just thought, wow, I've got to get out to the Far East at some stage in my life. And I had a choice in the Navy to be in the Marines and go to the south of England, or I had Hong Kong Police to go to the south of China. And I thought, well, it's an easy decision. I'm going to China.
All right. So it sounds like adventure was in your blood. How long did you stay with the Hong Kong Police, and where did you launch to from there?
Yeah, well, Hong Kong Police, you do what's called a tour, 2.5 years, and then you're expected to take 6 months paid leave, which sounds like a nice job. So I did a tour in Hong Kong, but then I stayed on, actually, because I'm a sailor. As you would have seen from my bio, the water's been part of my life, sailing been part of my life. When I was out in Hong Kong, I was doing a lot of sailing, but I also noticed that there was a gap in the market. There were no Europeans, no Brits, actually in the marine servicing industry. And if you had a yacht, Zoe, and in Hong Kong, who would you take it to? There was no face that you could easily communicate with and work. So I set up Manley Marine. And Manley transliterated into Cantonese as Manley, which means 10,000 miles. So it was a lucky name too. My work was good for 10,000 miles.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. So you started servicing the naval sector.
No, I didn't actually. It was a luxury yacht sector, so the sailing sector. So I was building boats actually in Australia, up in Port Macquarie. I was bringing boats from Taiwan. I was servicing all the local people's boats and yachts and super yachts, and had a cracking time.
Somehow that moved into taking on epic adventures. So tell me about your biggest epic adventure on a boat that you did.
Well, I guess the ultimate one, and I guess it is also actually, so the ultimate adventure you can do on a boat is racing around the world in a race called the BT Global Challenge, which actually goes around the world the wrong way. It's known as the toughest yacht race. And what I mean by going around the world the wrong way, it doesn't mean I'm an idiot who went the wrong way around. It means going west. So leaving UK and heading west across the Atlantic towards Boston in the States, and then disappearing down south to Buenos Aires in Argentina. Then when we go round Cape Horn at the bottom of South America, we're going west about against the prevailing winds, against the currents. And it's 32,000 miles. And more people have actually gone into space than have raced around the world the wrong way. It's just one of those things you just don't do because you're beating your head against the waves, you're beating your head against the wind for 9 months, essentially. So that was the ultimate challenge set up by an amazing man called Sir Che Blythe. And his premise, and you'll love this, Zoe, was it's all about attitude over ability. Because I need to quickly say, my crew were amateurs. 8 of my crew, I had 17 on my boat. 8 of my crew had never sailed before in their life.
You suckered them into it.
Absolutely, but they're undertaking the world's toughest yacht race. And I totally agree with Sir Che. I'd rather have a boatload of people who don't know how to, but are keen and have the right attitude, than a group of experts with the wrong attitude. And I think attitude is so important in life.
Oh, I agree. Now, first of all, coming back to the whole premise of going the wrong way and doing it the hard way, is that the whole point of it? It's like, we're going to sail around the world. That's hard. Let's make it harder and go backwards against the prevailing winds. Is that sort of the core premise of this race? Like, let's just make it as hard as possible?
Totally. It does sound strange when you say going backwards. That's like so you're reversing all the way around the world. You're not. You're pointing in the right direction, but you're going against the prevailing winds. Yeah, the race, fascinating premise. So Che Blythe said at the race, there are 12 identical boats, 1 professional skipper on each boat. Then all the crews were amateurs from all over the world between the ages of 20 and 60. And they were made into 12 equal teams. And then the teams are given to the skipper, and they say, right, skipper, make a team out of that lot, race them around the world, bring them back safely, and give it your best shot.
Okay, and it takes 9 months.
It took 9 months, exactly.
All right, so how do you go about building a team that can face all those terrible odds? Did you take some learning from your naval history, or did you make it up as you went along?
Massive from my naval bit. There's one particular model, shall we say, on leadership by an incredible man called John Adair. And he very kindly wrote in my book as well, because when I did get around to writing my book, I actually wrote to him to say thank you. And it's just very briefly, it's the three interlocking circles of task, team, and individual. And the danger is as leaders, we spend so much of our time just focusing on the task, that by definition, the task is done by a strong team of capable and committed individuals. And so this model helps you just do things like that. So before I even set sail, when I was thinking with my team, I was thinking, well, yeah, I need to teach them how to sail. They need to learn how to handle a boat. But first, we've got to come together as a team. But before we can come together as a team, I need to know how they are individually. What is their journey in life? How can this particular journey with me help them on their own path? What are their motivations? What are their needs? What are their fears? What are their preferences and the ways of communicating? So I had to spend time to not just me, but for themselves also to deeply know themselves and then to deeply know each other. So before we set sail, our understanding of self and other was as high as it possibly could be. Bearing in mind, Zoe, that my crew came from all over the world. They're all over and actually, I only got my whole crew together the day before we set sail. And so you're still building a team throughout. And I think there's another little lesson there is that, we do team building exercises. We think, right, I've done it now. No, it's never done. Your team is always a dynamic. It's always a moving feast. And as leaders, you must be totally conscious of all the time adjusting and tweaking and investing in our people, in our team, to make sure the dynamic is as strong as it can be.
Now, it sounds all very well and good, let's all bond together and set off on a grand adventure in the toughest race that we can come up with. What was the toughest time, do you think, for the individuals and the team on that whole adventure?
Gosh, that's a tricky one, because each of us had different tough times, if you know what I mean. There were some times when the sailing was extraordinarily physical. We bumped into a hurricane deep in the Atlantic as we left Boston and headed toward Buenos Aires. And I've got a beautiful story about that I can share later if you like, Zoe, which is important. Going around Cape Horn, it didn't disappoint. It's the most savage bit of ocean, savage bit of sea. The whole land there is called Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. And that's not because of the smoke and the flames, that's because of the mist and the storms and the clouds. And people just don't go that way round Cape Horn. You just don't do it. Even in the times of square riggers and the years of Nelson, whatever, it was easier and quicker to sail all the way around the world towards the east than it was to try and get through the passage of Cape Horn called Drake's Passage. The toughest physical bit also was coming into New Zealand, believe it or not. We got absolutely flattened. And 4 times as we approached the Cook Strait, the boat was on its side. The mast was in the water. We'd been hit by an extraordinary storm. And in trying to keep everybody on board, everybody safe, and everybody focused, because you still got to handle the boat as well. So we did have some tough physical times. There was some crew who really struggled with the silence, the beauty, the space, the size, because what the ocean teaches you is that individually we are utterly insignificant. And it's a beautiful release, but it can also be a real challenge, because in our world today, we're pumped full of self-importance. Everybody tells you how important you are, but actually in reality, we're not in the slightest. If you're a mid-ocean on a small boat, it's a 72-foot boat. It's bigger than the marina, but trust me, Zoe, middle of the ocean, 72-foot is absolutely minute. And you're a speck just sitting on that boat. You think about the enormity of the world and the curvature of the earth as you're sailing across. Individually, we are absolutely nothing, but that is a beautiful thing. But some people really struggle with that too.
Wow. I must say, I'm still stuck with that image of the boat on its side and the mast in the water. That sounds absolutely terrifying to me. And I love water. I'm a canoeist by background, and that still absolutely terrifies me. So let's talk about the other terrifying moment of sailing into or as you said, bumping into a hurricane, as if you're just bumping shoulders in an elevator. What happened?
Well, actually, Zoe, this is critical. Bear in mind, you've got to remember this is an amateur crew, so they're not professional sailors. They wouldn't have done these oceans before. 8 had never sailed before in their life. And as we left Boston and heading south, only a few days out of Boston, we got a warning saying there's a hurricane in our area. And it was Hurricane Michael is what it was called. And I'm thinking, okay, we're in a big area in North Atlantic. Maybe we're nowhere near it. But this was hurricane season. As we're coming south towards the equator, we're not in a great place. And the more information comes through, and an automatic sort of teletext machine on the boat tells me the position of the hurricane, and I look on the chart, I check out the position, I check my position, and I think, right, we are definitely going to bump into Hurricane Michael. There's no way we're going to miss Hurricane Michael. I know from the track of the hurricane that it's coming up towards us too. So what do? You are responsible for the lives of all the people on the boat. They've invested in you and given you their life. Here's Skipper, here's my life. Look after it, but give it back if you don't mind away. Don't take it away from me. And you've got a hurricane. This may sound crazy, Zoe, but my plan was actually to attack Hurricane Michael. Not to run away from it, not to try and survive it, but to turn it round and attack the hurricane. And my premise was this. If you're afraid of something, it consumes you. If you're afraid of something, then it is in control. If you're running away, then you're running away from it. It is still in control of you and your life. If you're afraid of something, your amygdala, your chimp kicks off in your head, your fight, flight, or freeze mechanism comes in, your blood leaves your cortex, you stop thinking, you stop relating. Your only thought is one of self-survival. And I felt that was a dangerous place to be. So somehow I had to turn this whole threat of Hurricane Michael into an opportunity. Now, a very quick bit, and in the story, we were known, by the way, as Team Large. Everything we did, we gave it large. And more information was coming from the hurricane, telling me that the wind speed in the hurricane was going to be up to 90 miles an hour. And when it described the sea state, it said within 100 nautical miles, the sea was going to be phenomenal. And I'd never heard the use of the word phenomenal to describe a sea state before. I said, this is just extraordinary sea. And I quickly checked what it was, phenomenal. And phenomenal means that you can get a 100-foot wave, a 30-meter wave. But a phenomenal bit has an extra 10 meters on top, an extra 30 feet on top, which is a breaking rolling crest. So that's 130 feet high. It's 40-meter waves is what you're getting. And so I described this to my crew, being really conscious, as you'll understand, about how we receive emotional information. We receive so much visually and with the tone, let alone the word. So I had to sound confident. I had to present as being confident and in control. And I explained a bit about the hurricane. And as I spoke about the hurricane and my crew were there, they were just absolutely silent. Some of them were white and shaking with fear. But I said, look, team, this is a large hurricane. They go, yeah. No, but we're Team Large. This is large. We're large. Team, it's a marriage. And there's this sort of silence in the back. So that we are going to attack Hurricane Michael. The other boats are running away from Hurricane Michael, but we are going to attack it. And my philosophy was to do just that and explain how we're going to do it. If we keep the wind at the same angle on the boat, then as the hurricane comes towards us, so because of the twisting in the wind, we won't get caught in the hurricane. We'll come in on the side of the hurricane. And when the barometer drops to a certain pressure, we know where we are. So we'll tack out, we get a kick in the pants and come out in first place. So as I first spoke, I was really conscious of a beautiful model of motivation by a guy called Dave McClellan called 3 Needs Theory. I'm sure you know it, where it says we have a balance of needs between achievement, affiliation, and influence. So as I spoke to my team, I had to tap into that motivational language, knowing that some of my team were really there to win. Some of my team were just there to be part of a team, and some of my team were there to grow and to make sure they had some input. And so I spoke about the hurricane. I said, right, team, if we do this, we come out in first place. And a third of my team said, yeah, come on, let's attack Hurricane Michael. But then I spoke about the team. And I said, look, we can't do this without all of us pulling together. I believe it'll make us stronger as a team. And it was one of my crew, whose nickname was the Professor, who had a strong need for affiliation, who stood up and said, Skipper, you're right. I love my team. I'll do anything for them and anything with them. I trust you. I trust the boat. And I think if we attack Hurricane Michael, we're out of it quicker and it's better for the team. So now I had 2/3 of my team with me on this crazy plan to attack a hurricane. One small group. And one of them prodded me in the chest and said, Skipper, don't you play in my life. They needed influence in the course. So I said, look, whoever needs to know, you come with me. You could be my navigation team for the storm. And I explained all the parameters of a hurricane, how it all works. And I explained the path of what it is we've got to do. And I said, you can take us in. You measure the wind strength. You measure the barometer. You keep the wind at the right angle. You can influence our journey. And they said, seriously? I said, yeah, I'm still the skipper, so final decision's mine, but you're my navigation team. So they said, all right, Skipper, let's do it. So by tapping into the inner motivational need of every single one of my crew, I got their commitment for us to attack the biggest energy source on the planet in a small 72-foot boat. And Zoe, it was absolutely remarkable.
All right. We'll hear about what that was actually like in just a second. I just need to capture my response, which is I'd be crying. I'd be quaking, white-faced and crying in the corner for sure. The second question I had about this messaging you had for your team in the moment of peak experience, did you consciously have that model saying, right, this is how I'm going to need to sell this thing? Did you have that at the back of your mind, or is this something that you realized you did innately later on?
A bit of both to a degree. So remember I spoke about that John Adair model, the task team individual. I remember on the side of my paper, because even though with modern technology, you still have paper charts, because as you can imagine, water and electrics don't really get on. They're not good bedfellows. And so on my side of the paper chart, I remember drawing the 3 interlocking circles and thinking to myself, as you get into the storm, Manny, into this hurricane, don't forget, this is an opportunity to build and develop the team. This is an opportunity to test and challenge the individuals, but also support the individuals. So I've got to recognize the needs of the individuals. I've got to recognize the need of the collective, rather than just focus on surviving the storm. So I did physically write that down to help me. When it came to the bit to attack the hurricane, that was a very conscious decision. But I didn't want fear to be the overriding factor because, as I said earlier, but if I'm attacking something, then I'm in control. And it was amazing what happened. I'll explain exactly what happened in a minute. So by turning this threat to an opportunity and turning the mindset around, I felt we'd be in a safer place than if we were panicking or running away. And so then, having done the work right at the beginning, and I said to you earlier, Zoe, when I first met my team, I said, get to know them and understand them. I recognized the main motivational needs, and I knew I had to talk to them all. And if you analyze any great motivational speech in history, you'll see that all the speeches tap into all 3 of the main motivational needs. So then it appeals to everybody. And as a leader, this is critical because I may have a preference. Well, I do. My main motivational need is more around affiliation and influence than it is achievement per se. So the trouble is, as a leader, is that we speak to ourselves. Well, I would motivate them in the same way I'd motivate myself. But that's not the point. The whole point of leadership is not about you. It's about the other people. What are their needs? What's going on deep within them, beneath their iceberg, if you like, their needs and their fears, their motivations. That's what you've got to tap into. And so it was a very conscious decision to moderate my language to ensure that I tapped into a wide range of motivational needs. And I knew that within each of those groups, there would be somebody who would be vocal in talking about that group. And there was. There's one particular person who's really just wanted to win the race. And Susan said, if it came out of Hurricane Michael in first place, was, right, come on, let's go. And then the next person, as I said, the professor with the team bit, and then one of my crew who just needed to grow and to learn, was so interested about absorbing themselves into what it was to be a hurricane that they got lost in their own motivation in a positive way. So it was conscious, very much so.
So you attacked the hurricane.
Yes.
What was that like?
I said about how you feel insignificant. Boy, don't you just. The power, the size, the scale, this incredible cloud we originally saw on the horizon. As we got closer to it and it came closer to us, it just took over our whole world until the whole sea was one, whole sky was just one cloud. The noise, the confusion, the wind is circling very rapidly, so the seas are so confused, and they were in it at night as well. And there's thunder and lightning. And what is incredible with the lightning bit is that when a lightning bolt hits the water just in front of the boat, you suddenly see everything, these enormous waves. And then as soon as the light is gone, you're blind because your eyes have just been shot by the light and you can see nothing but hear everything, the roaring of the water. And you know there's a massive wall, a monster of water just out there hurtling towards you at 30 miles an hour. But what was incredible in the middle of all this is I overheard a conversation, 2 of my crew. And one was saying to the other one, you know what? I think if we pull this rope in harder, I think we can go faster. Zoe, they were trying to go faster in a hurricane. They weren't afraid of Hurricane Michael. And that was the most beautiful thing. And what was lovely was when the clouds had gone, the dust had settled, we came out of Hurricane Michael in first place. Only one piece.
I just don't know how you actually confront that. That sounds like in my biggest nightmare. That's amazing. How extraordinary for everybody to come through that.
Oh, and gosh, we were so much stronger as a team. The conversations, the energy, the difference it made individually and collectively was truly extraordinary. From that moment on, we really, truly were team large. We were a different team, a different strength, a different character. And people in those moments had faced their own demons. People that I was worried about shone. It was extraordinary how sometimes as leaders we think we understand and know people, then we realize, actually, no, we don't. We can only really truly scratch the surface, because there were some people that I was concerned about. But you know what? In that hurricane, they just surprised me in such a beautiful way. And you are humbled as a leader when you realize that if you give people that confidence, you give them the space, you give them the responsibility to do stuff, and don't take it away from them because your own doubts and fears. I've always been totally blown away by people's capabilities and their attitudes and their strengths. It's beautifully humbling when that happens. And Hurricane Michael was exactly that.
Manley, this is an incredible experience that you had as a crew for 9 months. And one thing I know about incredible experiences like that is that when they end, it's quite challenging. And your theme of your work now is about empowering compassionate leadership. And I'm wondering how you go about ending an experience like that and how you need to be compassionate through the end of the journey as well as during the tough times.
Zoe, that's a brilliant question. It's something I was very conscious of because the race had happened a couple of iterations before, 4 years before and before that. And less time was spent on the leadership ability of the skippers than their sailing ability. And there were a few problems, particularly at the end, where people didn't want to leave. You know, it's an incredible adventure, totally absorbing. And then what do? My premise was this, is that nothing is absolute in our life. Our life is a journey, and each chapter within the journey, by definition, is just that. It's a small portion of the whole wandering of our life, the odyssey that is our life. And so before we even left Southampton, before we left the UK, I spent time individually with my crew saying, right, Zoe, you're doing this race around the world. Fine, I don't want to know why you're doing the race. What I want to know is, what is this race going to do for you in the next chapter of your life? So rather than just thinking it as an absolute goal in its own right, it was recognizing that for every individual, it's just another step in their incredible journey in life. And that if they're thinking ahead of what this will do for you, it means there is no end. So when we do get back, it's just the beginning of a chapter which you already knew. So a lovely example, this one of my crew, Richard, who used to work in a supermarket called Sainsbury's in the north of England, stacking shelves. His nickname became known as Tesco, which is a rival supermarket, who said he wanted to change his life. His story is beautiful because we spoke about what life did you want to be in afterwards. And he said he wanted my life. He wanted to be a sailor. And what was incredible, Zoe, because of that, because his thinking wasn't just in this particular moment, his thinking was also about the journey. When we arrived in Boston in the States, he didn't just go down to the nearest bar. He went to the yacht club and he put his name on the board to volunteer for crew. He met the officers of the yacht club, the commandant. He went down to some marine servicing companies. He went down to yacht brokers. And every single place around the world, he created a conscious network of people involved in that industry because that was going to be his future. Also, beforehand, we did corporate sailing for a few months and he would be like my shadow. Just follow me around everywhere I went, asking questions. Why do you do that, Skipper? Why do you do this? But it didn't take long, Zoe. Even I think just a couple of months, even though he'd never sailed before in his life, before he stopped asking questions and started giving me advice. Saying, Skipper, you always do the rope that way. What about doing it this way? And sometimes there's an absolute power and strength in people not coming from an established position of experience, but coming in from a different universe and challenging our own. So, and the story of Tesco is beautiful. And I tell it a lot to youth groups and children particularly, because he reached out and grabbed his own life and made it his own. And since then, he is now a professional sailor in his own right. He's been around the world 3 more times. He's currently the skipper on a super yacht somewhere out in the Caribbean or wherever he is, I don't know. And I think this was the point, Zoe. And again, I think we go wrong in business as well. When we put in absolute goals where there's an end, it all goes wrong. And a lot of research at the end of the 2012 London Olympics was that the British athletes who got gold lost all sense of purpose and meaning. And so life's a journey. And everything we do is just a step on that journey. And so no step is absolute in its own right. And so I think what we should do all the time is, when I work in businesses and industry and I talk to them, I say, this is my job. I say, fine, but what is it going to do for you in your life? This isn't your job for life anymore. That doesn't happen. That was a couple of generations ago. This is your job with this company for a few years, maybe 10, but it's still not a life. So what is it going to do for you for your life? Because if you can do that, if you can get people to recognize that the moment they're in is part of their destiny, that is their commitment. Because then it's their life that you're working with, and it's their journey that they are on. You haven't taken them away from their vision of the world and forced them into yours. You've married the two visions together. And I think that is the purpose of leadership, is to recognize the individual journeys and feed them individually. And then you just have to align them for a relatively short period of time and then let people go off on their journeys into the world, having made an incredible investment in themselves and you in them too.
Thank you for sharing that, Manley. It has provided me with the solution to what I've called achiever disease, which you talked about. You set a goal and people are deflated afterwards, whether it's sailing around the world or whether it's getting the gold medal in the Olympics. And there's this period of mourning and depression that can come once you achieve those peaks. So I'm curious about, for you, that was obviously an incredible experience to sail around the world the wrong way. And then you've continued to go on to do other amazing things. What's the thread of the journey for you? It's not harder and more difficult things. There's something else there for you. What is it that shapes your journey?
And it was different things as well. You're quite right. It's not harder or first. There are explorers who go out there always have to do first, but I think it's going to only end in one way. But eventually the first is their finish, if you know what I mean. The adventure has always been within my soul. I was brought up as a kid to, whatever you do in life, accept the consequences of your actions and redeem your situation, which means you make a choice in your life, so you accept your choice. Don't blame anybody else. If you're in trouble, you sort yourself out. That was since I was a small kid. So I've always been adventurous. The first time I sailed across the English Channel to France, I was 16. I was a skipper of a boat, and so it went on. And then I did do a race to the magnetic North Pole a few years later. And since then, I do regular little expeditions to places as much as I can to do a couple of things, to test myself, but not just from a leadership perspective, but just to keep challenging myself, to keep my journey of growth and exploration. Because when you do invest time in a challenge, which is both physical and mental and spiritual as well, you learn and you grow in the process. You're pushing back your own barriers, your own perceived limits. And so you grow as a person. I think the most important thing for the work I do and also for my own self is our self-awareness is the most important element of our own sense of self-worth and, I believe, happiness. And so if I can push myself and discover more of who I am, I think that's a good place to be. There's a business side to it as well. I'm a keynote speaker, and it's great to have incredible stories to talk about. I mean, the polar bear attack when I was on the things at Magnetic North Pole, race Magnetic North Pole. Whoa, incredible. So it does help fill up your library of stories that you can bring in to do whatever it may be. So it's around the leadership, it's around the stories, but it's around my own personal growth too. And I must confess, Zoe, I do have a tendency to go through life, and I do tend to say yes. And people say, hey, Manley, do you fancy? Oh, yes. Yes, please. I think life is much more fun if you say yes.
It's certainly to some invitations, that's for sure, some less so. I want to conclude with this conversation around compassion and leadership and being a compassionate leader. And you talked about how needing compassion in the peak moments is essential. So tell me about your compassionate leadership philosophy.
Yeah, thank you. So, because compassion is a word which I think is confused. I use the Dalai Lama's definition of compassion, and I must confess, I cannot think of a more worldly source of wisdom on compassion than His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who studies it and lives it, breathes it, and whatever. And he talks about empathy. Empathy is to know somebody. Compassion, then, is to work with that knowledge with positive intent. So in other words, compassion is understanding with positive action. Now that in itself is a hugely positive concept. As a leader, it means you've got to understand first. It's not empathy as in the taking on your pain or whatever it may be. It's not around trauma. It's not around sadness. It's not around anything negative. It's a beautifully positive concept. But it means, Zoe, that if I was going to be compassionate to you, I've got to know you and understand you deeply. And then with everything I hear and understand, I then act with positive intent. So it instantly takes away judgment. It instantly takes away any sense of you and I being greater or lesser. It just recognizes the differences within us, and it gives me a positive mindset. And then once you start exploring that philosophy of compassion, so it then developed the concept that compassionate leadership is to secure the best for all. And this is critical. Secure is long-term. Compassionate leadership isn't just a grab and drop. It's not about, I'm going to screw you as hard as I can now to get this one project over the side, and I don't care about your future. That's not compassion. Securing the best for you is a critical thing. Because if I secure the best for you, I tap into your self-worth. If I do that, I get your commitment. And if I get your commitment, I've got your engagement, I've got collaboration, I've got your accountability, ownership, innovation, I've got your resilience, I've got your well-being, I've got your happiness, and guess what? I've got your performance. So the principle of compassionate leadership, understanding positive action, securing the best for all, is to gain commitment. All is important as well, because so often in life I see leaders, and not just leaders, people who, in their desire to serve others, compromise ourselves. Do you really get all the sleep you know you really ought to get, to do all the exercise you need to do, eat as healthy as you know you ought to, spend time on your own hobbies? And our desire to serve other people, the first person we compromise is ourselves. But I challenge that. As a compassionate leader, we have to be compassionate with ourselves first. We have to deeply understand who we are and then act with positive intent. Drop the judgment on self. Don't focus just on our foibles and our weaknesses. Recognize those, but then be compassionate with ourselves. Recognizing physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, intellectually. Am I being compassionate to Manley first? As Zoe, are you being compassionate to yourself? Because if we are in the best place we can be as a leader, by definition, our service is better. Otherwise, our service is compromised. I also firmly believe, by the way, that all includes Mother Earth. We've got to be more compassionate to this beautiful, fragile planet that we find ourselves on.
I'm wondering if this awakening to compassionate leadership for all, including Mother Earth, arose within you on your grand adventures and just being dwarfed by the magnificence of this living planet. Is that where it started to emerge for you, or did it come somewhere else?
I've always been one with nature. My place for my spiritual space is by the sea. If I'm struggling with something, I'll go for a run. But if I'm going for a run by the sea or the water, I'm in a better place. And I can sit and spend hours just sitting on the dock of the bay. One of my favorite songs, by the way. And so the nature bit has always been there. But you're quite right. When you see it in its scale, when you're going in the deep Arctic up to the North Pole or middle of the ocean, the southern oceans, deep, gosh, it is extraordinary. But then you also see the damage that we're doing to it. And what worries me is the scale, the enormity, the beauty of it all. And yet the impact we are having as humans is just nonsensical. We are quite happily marching towards a cliff, which we know about, but we seem incapable of making the decisions because we're so short-term focused as a species. And, we're like a bunch of termites. We'll grow and grow and grow until we decimate the area, then we'll die back. And you worry about our species' intelligence, whether we can do this. But then I also meet incredible people on my journey who are not just evangelists, they're active people who are challenging the way we deal with this beautiful planet. And sometimes I oscillate between hope and despair. Despair generally when I look at the governments and the large elements, but then hope when I look at the individuals and the effort that's been put in to do well. And actually, it's hope is the winner at the end of the day. I think we will recover, but boy, we're pushing it.
Great and wise insight there. Manley, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I would love to spend more time with you and hear more about your adventures. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I've got a silly name, so I'm quite easy to find. So Manley is a great name. My main website is Manley Talks, and then the Compassionate Leadership Academy is how we've developed all the philosophy and the stories to bring compassion out into the world. We're desperate. We're known as the original voice on compassion, and we're desperate to be a small jigsaw in this movement to take compassion and spread it across the world.
It's a beautiful mission, and I'm glad that I can do my part in spreading your vision and your word. And thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wonderful stories and your wonderful perspective. I have loved it.
Hey, Zoe, thank you. A real pleasure. Thanks a lot. Lovely to meet you.
Wow, that was really amazing. I just loved the stories, and I loved listening to Manley, and I loved hearing about his philosophy. We had quite a bit of a chat after we hit end record about compassion and resilience and how we need to redesign organizations and team structures to allow people to thrive better. His work in the Compassionate Leadership Academy and bringing the message of compassionate leadership around the world is incredibly inspiring. I really loved it. Plenty to take away from this conversation. If nothing else, the image of sailing and tackling a hurricane is one to remember. I'm sure it'll reappear in my dreams from time to time. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Another thing to talk about is the release of my brand new debut novel, The Olympus Project. It does have leadership themes. It does have compassion themes in there. And at the moment, you can order it at my website, zoerouth.com, for the collector's edition, printed paperback edition. The ebook, Amazon print-on-demand edition, will be available in November of 2022. And the audiobook the week after that, in the first week of December. So that's all on the go right now. But if you want a signed autographed copy, just go to my website, zoerouth.com, click on books, click on The Olympus Project, and there it is. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.